Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. As always, I hope you are doing well. I have a very in-depth conversation about enlightenment on the show today. My favorite guest, Indu Arora, is back, and she packs so much into this conversation. In this episode, we explore what is enlightenment, what are some of the qualities of a seeker for enlightenment, how does one actually find relevance of enlightenment in today's yoga, and a whole bunch of different things about enlightenment, including the types of enlightenment. And sometimes we fall into these pitfalls in enlightenment or on this journey, and understanding yoga and enlightenment as a conversation. Indu, as always, packs so much into every single episode that she shows up for. This one is no different. So I have been waiting to bring you this conversation about enlightenment in yoga. I hope you find this valuable. I hope you follow Indu to continue to learn more. I have linked everything about Indu Arora and her offerings in the show notes, which you can find at Let's Talk Yoga /listen. Indu has also been on the show before, and she talks about the subtle body in this episode. She talks about yoga nidra. All of these are in-depth conversations that are available on the podcast with Indu Arora. So if you want to listen to more conversations we've done with Indu, then just scroll down on the podcast description and you should be able to find all the other episodes that we've done with Indu over the past 4 years. Each one of them is a masterclass, and she is always very present, very thoughtful, and generous in her appearances here on the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. So that's today's episode. But before I let you go listen to all things Samadhi, my pranayama online course and immersive teacher training is coming up on February 14th. Starting next week, I will be talking a lot more about this course, but know that enrollments are already open and people have started enrolling. The early bird price is on right now. So if you are someone who is keen to learn more pranayama in a structured, authentic, and relatable way, then explore this course. Again, I will be talking more about it in the weeks ahead, but just know that enrollments are open and it starts in another 8 weeks. That's it from me. Enjoy this conversation with Indu about all things Samadhi. Hi, Indu. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's always a joy to see you, and especially with this topic because it's such a big topic in yoga. So where do we start? Should we start by getting into understanding what is enlightenment in yoga?
See, the word for enlightenment, if there is Samadhi. However, when we want to understand something in yoga or something which has a deeper or secretive meaning, there are 3 ways to approach it. One is the shabdartha, which means the word meaning. Second is the padartha, which means the context in which the word is used. So the sutra or the phrase, how it is utilized. And the third is bhavartha, which means what is your personal, individual experience about this thought, about this idea, about this meaning. So we can explore the first 2. The third is individual journey. So enlightenment, that's it sounds like a peak experience. It sounds like a one-time experience, sounds like a magical place. In my little experience, it is a place where you arrive with courage, sincerity, and discernment. It's not something that magically happens. It is a conscious choice on an everyday basis. So let's just explore, what is enlightenment or what is Samadhi. Just the first part, that is the shabdartha, the word and its meaning. So Samadhi is made up of these 3 parts, sama, a, and dhi. So the last part, dhi, means the intellect. or the mind or the entire substance of mind, which we call antahakaran in yoga, which means manas, buddhi, chitta, ahamkar, all the four components of what we call mind, not just the thinking mind, not just the feeling mind, but the entirety of mind. A means to come forward or to come together. And sama means total. So the totality of the bits and pieces of mind, all aspects of mind coming together towards a state of absorption or dissolution. That would be, in terms of word meaning, the meaning of enlightenment, the ability to gather yourself in that moment completely, to absorb completely, would be considered samadhi or enlightenment.
That was beautifully explained. So is samadhi fleeting? Or is samadhi something that stays?
Yes, that's a good question. Initially, I'm thinking of India. I'm from India. So growing up, I remember the electricity was flickering, when the voltage was not steady. If you switch on a tube light, it would flicker before it gains its proper strength. In the same way, when we are working towards strengthening our nervous system, subtle body, nadis, chakras, when we are working towards it, initially there are times when there is a flicker or a fleeting moment. What we understand, I did 20 minutes of meditation. Well, the fact that you're calling it bound by time itself makes it an oxymoron, because meditation cannot be timed. It's beyond time. In that meditative absorbed state, there might be a fleeting moment of absolute void or nothingness or noneness or everythingness. So we do have touch and go moments. That state acts like a touchstone, parasmani, which means that every time the mind touches that state of complete absorption, it's not for nothing. There is something that shifts. We may not be able to verbalize it. We may not be able to see it immediately, but there is something that shifts and transforms. And overall, what it brings is a level of clarity or discernment, the ability to separate, the ability to see things differently, clearly from a stable state of mind. So from that perspective, yes, samadhi can be fleeting. But eventually, the state of samadhi that is talked about in yoga texts is not that fleeting state. It is that stable state, which means a state of attainment from which you do not fall below.
So the texts you mentioned, the texts describe and explain samadhi, they talk about different types of samadhi, correct? So what would be the different types of samadhi, and are any of those relevant to today's practitioners?
The thing about yoga is that it is timeless. It is not about, is it relevant today or not? Even in the sutras by Patanjali, the first sutra is Atha, which means the present moment is always given the importance, and the present is the kind of present which is beyond the dualities of past and future. Which means the yoga texts are, first of all, the revealed texts, which means they are the kind of knowledge which doesn't become stale. It renews itself based on individual capacity to think, to discern, to understand. So the kinds of samadhi that are mentioned, for example, Ghiran Samhita mentions 6 kinds of samadhi. Then Yoga Sutras mention 2 kinds, and then the eventual, that is Dharma Megha Samadhi. So different texts talk about different levels of samadhi, but instead of going, which becomes a very heavy, loaded, intellectual conversation, we can go into those names and features. But the way I have found it beneficial to understand and explore is only if we would have explored Om, we would understand Samadhi. When we think about reciting Om or when we recite Om, for most of us, what is Om? It is just the recitation of it, and it ends with the verbal or vocalization of it.
Mm.
We do not pay attention to the 7 stages of Om after the sound ends.
Mm.
Once the Om ends, which is the M sound or the humming, which is a kind of tapering of the sound note into the needle of a sound, which is called nada shuchi, which means the sound tapers like the tip of a needle. We have to follow that. Everything else is a preparation. Everything else is almost like a preparatory exercise to allow the mind to get into that state of focus. Like in the Ashtangas, dharana. But before dharana, there is pratyahara. So then only after that pratyahara, that inward movement, there is dharana, that is concentration. That humming part is just the dharana. After that dharana, that sound is utilized as a tool for concentration. As the mind continues to follow that sound, that very moment where the sound merges into silence, that is dhyana. The moment the sound merges into silence, we must continue to follow the silence because there are different levels of silence. The way I have, I am sure the listeners have all experienced it. There is a kind of airy silence, that makes you uncomfortable. There is a kind of spooky silence. There is a kind of silence when you are in love, when you're speechless. There is a silence when you are scared, worried, when there is a silence of amazement, wonder. Isn't there different qualities in that silence? So we understand that even though silence has no sound, it has different qualities. That is the kind of silence I'm talking about. That once you end Om, where the sound merges with the silence, and we follow that absorption is dhyana. But after the dhyana comes super absorption or supreme absorption, which is called laya. But this is the path of nada laya. Through the passage of nada, sound, you're going into laya. At that level, if we pay attention, and I am sure, and I hope so, I sincerely hope that the listeners connect to this, that when you stop listening to a vocal or external or gross or corporeal sound, after that, there is still the memory of that sound. After the memory of that sound, there is still that impression of that memory. After that impression of that memory, there is that thought of that sound. Then there is that feel of that sound. You have to keep going back. This is the different kinds of samadhi, which in Yoga Sutras is defined as savitarka, savichara, sa-ananda, sa-asmita, from all this which is sa-bija to nirbija. But eventually I would say that forget about that. How about the sounds that it is such a common practice in yoga classes to recite Om or to talk about Om or to see the symbol of Om. It has become mass level awareness, Om. But we have not fully done justice to Om yet. If we understand Om, or if we genuinely take interest in Om, we can understand different levels of samadhi, which is different levels of tuning out, different levels of silence. I will leave you with that thought.
No, it's a beautiful explanation. And I've never thought of it this way, as the silence and going deeper and deeper into it. And there's one experience that was coming to my mind. And it's that moment after Shavasana, where when you get up, and it's probably a very simplified explanation of version of what you're talking about, but there's that silence. And for a while, you don't want to interact or engage or be engaged. And I always remember how precious that feels. And this was reminding me of that. I always think, if only I can extend this state, if only I can extend this state. And it was reminding me of that. There's no question there, but yeah.
I would like to add one thing though,
Please.
Because we talked about Shavasana. The same tool is utilized for different purposes. If we think about Shavasana and try to give it a context in yogic terms, which means the context of Ashtangas, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Which limb will connect to Shavasana?
Pratyahara.
Absolutely. So the limb that connects to Shavasana is pratyahara, which means merely by the process of withdrawing the sensory engagement from gross to subtle and slowly from subtle to causal, we are able to experience that break, that glimpse of bliss or the glimpse of peace or the glimpse of ananda. However, if you want to place another practice or another tool which takes us closest to samadhi, that would be yoga nidra, not shavasana. Because shavasana is just the U-turn. Yoga nidra is the absorption. Shavasana takes you towards sukshma sharira, subtle body. And yoga nidra takes you towards shunya asana. So there's a difference between shavasana and shunya asana. And yoga nidra is that tool as well as that state, which is a bridge between dhyana and samadhi.
For the listeners, we've done a conversation with Indu on yoga nidra. So we will link that in the podcast description. And I also know you have a yoga nidra course coming up in January. I'll bring that up at the end, but I'm leaving a plug here for it because I think the way you teach yoga nidra is very valuable. So something that's coming to my mind, Indu, is to understand samadhi in the smallest way. You have to first develop a clearer understanding of the sukshma sharira. Because if your exposure to yoga is asana only, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if you don't have any context of the sukshma sharira, then it's harder to understand samadhi, because all your pratyahara, and you mentioned the sukshma sharira once or twice in this conversation, understanding the subtle body will help you gain more clarity and context of samadhi. Am I understanding that correctly?
It always helps to have a context. Just content is not enough, because that is then subject to dilution, misunderstanding, appropriation. Then it would lead to samadhi becoming the name of a product. Right?
Yeah.
So absolutely context is important. And at the same time, we have to also understand that when we talk about states, whether it is the state of asana, the state of pranayama, the state of pratyahara, the state of dhyana, or the eventual state in yoga that is equal to yoga, that is samadhi, we have to understand that it's a consequence of the kriyas or the practices. It cannot be pursued directly. We can only prepare ourselves for it. And one of the things that I find missing is silence. That is why I'm emphasizing it. That that is that we are so much surrounded by clutter and information, and there is so much information available that we have forgotten that the actual source of true information has always been soul, has always been within ourselves. And in order to reach there, we have to value quiet. We have to value silence, which is called mauna.
Mm-hmm.
And the one who practices mauna becomes muni. That silence is so important, whether you are practicing asanas or pranayama, or no matter what tool that you are utilizing in order to come closer to the state of yoga, we have to deal with mental clutter.
I always think of mauna as the combination of silence and space, because that mental clutter, there's just no space or capacity for many things, and different forms of silence. And I think you and I have had this moment in conversation where silence of the eyes, silence for the ears, literal talking mauna, and how to bring more mauna into our everyday lives. I believe it's in one of our previous conversations. I'll dig it out and share that with the listeners below. But Indu, if I'm tracing back, what is the benefit of enlightenment? So why should we put all this effort in to go to that highest point, while what we get along the way is good enough? Now, that might be the worst question I've asked you. I hope it makes sense. Why put this massive effort? What does enlightenment give us?
There is something called samasthiti.
Mm-hmm.
In yoga, asanas, it is called that standing position, balanced standing position.
Mm-hmm. Like Tadasana.
Tadasana, samasthiti, a little different in my perspective, but that balance is what I'm pointing towards, that harmony. Everything craves to come back to that state of harmony. Not just the body and the mind and the breath, also the nature, prakriti, the universe. It's continuously striving towards that state of balance. Upholding or pursuing that state of balance is called dharma. Upholding or pursuing that which brings harmony. And sometimes harmony does not just means being peaceful and doing nothing. At times, it also means fighting the good fight. So let's not misunderstand that I'm only talking about peace and love and, whatever needs to be done. Just like in nature, there is all kinds of tornadoes and wildfires, and to come back to that balance. What is that for? For dharma. The reason we are pursuing that state of mind which is free of mind, right? Samadhi is a state which is mindless, mind-free, and single-minded, all of it. That it is beyond the state of mind. The reason we are pursuing it is for the harmony, for balance, for clarity, for sanity. So an individual can make decisions which can maintain harmony, within the body, through the knowledge of Ayurveda, through diet, lifestyle, harmony, rhythm. Then the individual affects the family, it affects the community, it affects the society, it affects the planet. So that individual balance matters. There has to be that constant striving towards the eye of the storm, not the storm. The chaos is there. We enter towards that point of stability in order to have discernment, in order to contribute to our own body, our own karmas, and therefore affecting everything else, which itself is an act of dharma.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not for selfishness that one attains samadhi.
Mm-hmm.
It is so that, in fact, they become even more productive members of family, of society.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not a mentation, it is not a mental concept. It is something, as I mentioned, it is something that we have to decide on an everyday basis, that why my balance of mind, harmony of mind, clear state of mind matters. Because it affects everything else.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing which is not connected.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like that ripple effect. It starts with you and then it moves out. It reminds me directly of the first yama and how it is the yamas are for me and for you to live in harmony. It's like a full circle almost. It starts there and it slowly goes further up in a lived experience. So, and I apologize for all my simplistic questions about samadhi, okay? But is enlightenment for everyone?
A moment of going back to when you were talking about ahimsa.
Mm-hmm.
Ahimsa paramo dharma.
Mm.
The highest dharma is ahimsa. And the highest ahimsa is dharma. Which means that we have to constantly strive towards that simplicity without dilution, which means move towards harmony. Now coming back to, is enlightenment for everybody? Who am I to talk about it? It's a very good ego ride for me to talk about it.
Mm.
B, is yoga for everybody? We have to come back to that. And the answer is yes and no. The answer is yes and no. Yoga is for everybody. Is it for everybody? Is everyone really ready to understand what is truly yoga?
That is questionable, yes. Mm-hmm.
Is because what we are searching in the name of yoga is maybe a workout, maybe moving along with the trend. It depends, right? So in the same way, enlightenment is for everybody. However, enlightenment is neither easy nor effortless. It requires viveka khyati, which I'm talking about as discernment. It requires abhyasa, that in Yoga Sutra it's talked about it as consistent, dedicated efforts. It also requires what you talked about in terms of shavasana, that is vairagya, pratyahara, letting go. It has certain requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to fulfill those requirements, one must be in the state of what is called virasana. Virasana, which is called warrior pose. But here it means the path of the courageous. There are different kind of viras, right? There is dharma vira, there is dhyana vira, there is bhakti vira, there is kshama vira, there is dana vira. So the listeners who may not understand, when we think of Veer Asana or Veerbhadra Asana, everyone thinks of warrior 1, 2, 3. But we do not go into the depth of what does Veera means. Are you that courageous one to forgive? Kshama Veera. Are you that courageous one to love, to fall in love, to rise in love? Bhakti Veera. Are you that courageous one to give everything? Dana Veera. Are you that courageous one who is going to fight the good fight? Shura Veera. What kind of Veera are you going to invite to embody when you practice Virasana today? So this path is the path of Veera Asana. we have to have courage from time to time, from moment to moment, depending upon the context. Sometime it would ask us to be Kshama Vira. Other times it would ask us to be Dharma Vira. Other times it will ask us to be Dana Vira. It does require courage, and it does require sitting with yourself, which you mentioned as a space, which is the same as sitting in silence. It's one and the same thing. It requires sitting and allowing everything to settle so that discernment can rise. So yes, it is for everybody, and no, it is not for everybody. Let us not fool ourselves that it is a fruit for everybody to enjoy. It is, but you will have to work for it.
Oh, absolutely. No, that was so beautifully explained. Everything you explain is so beautifully explained. But what strikes me is, Indu, we usually think of, and I'm generalizing considerably, of techniques and ways to attain a certain practice, whether it's a kriya, whether it's an asana, whether it is something like samadhi or even meditation. We're thinking technique. Teach me the how to. And we don't give enough space and time for the residue of after the techniques and that marination that has to happen, right? So that's what I was hearing from you is it's in every single crevice moment, it fills everything up, every thought. And that's the depth you need. It's not just sitting for hours with your eyes closed. It's also what happens when your eyes are open. And it's everywhere, all the time, on this path. And that's how I'm hearing it. Feel free to correct me if I'm missing something. But just that what I hear is that distinction of here's the to-do part of it and here's the to-be part of it. And that discernment.
No, it's very, very correctly said what you shared, Arundhati, that whether someone is practicing asanas as technique or pranayama as technique. So this is something that I have thought about, observed, contemplated upon, that one of the most common texts for practitioners of yoga is Yoga Sutras. The second most common is Bhagavad Gita. But Yoga Sutras is a text that is touched upon in most of the teacher training programs, and so on and so forth. If that is really our inspiration, I will say it one more time. If that is really our inspiration, there is no mention of asana there. Only the state of asana is discussed. There is no mention of pranayama, only dirgha sukshma, only the quality is mentioned. There is none of these things are mentioned. So I wonder then, what is truly our source of inspiration? We are reading something, but we are not following it. It's really what asana is. After doing all those kriyas, different folds, molds, and holds, whatever they are, after doing all of that, when you be with yourself, irrespective of your body position, whichever is effortless to you, I'm not even talking about cross-legged, whichever is effortless to you, that effortlessness is asana. Whether it lasts for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and slowly we build upon it so that effortlessly it increases. Not by using different kind of belts and this and that. No, effortlessly that 1 second becomes 2 seconds. That is asana. Effortlessly after doing, I think of pranayam as an eraser when we talk about technique. So when you're doing anuloma viloma, erasing the friction between Ida and Pingala. When you are doing Brahmari, erasing the friction from the entry point of prana. Or when you're practicing Shitali, Sitkari, the prana when it touches the lips versus when it touches the tongue versus when it touches the teeth. Or prana when it touches the vocal cords. Ujjayi. Prana when it touches the chest. Bhastrika. All these are entry points of prana. We practice these techniques to erase the friction. As a result of it, the state becomes sukshma and dirgha, which means dirgha is prolonged and sukshma is subtle. So when that state is attained, that is pranayama. In the same light, we have to start paying attention to savoring the meal that we have prepared. We spend, this is the recipe, these are the ingredients, this is my cooking, this is what I'm going to serve in. Now sit and enjoy. Be with it, like what you said, to do and to be.
It's a very deep thought, and it sometimes gets missed in this culture of more and more and what's next. And just this last weekend, we're 1 weekend away from closing a study program at the studio. And someone was asking me, what should I study next? And I actually told them, for the next 2 years, don't study any other long course. Sit with what you have learned in the past 3 months and just go deeper into that. And don't study for the next 2 years at least, something new. And go deeper in it, exhaust this, and then go further. And it just reminded me of that. And to just be in that moment of savoring it. What about the ego in enlightenment? Because I feel like when I hear you speak, this is churning the ego to be, what's the word? Selfless. Full of yourself, but also selfless. I'm not able to explain it, but I think you understand what I mean. That state of full and empty together. But sometimes, if we are not led in the correct direction, or we don't have the correct guidance, or we think enlightenment is a to-do list to grow your yoga somehow, how does the ego, ahamkara, interact or condition with enlightenment?
Any wise being or guru in real sense that I have met in my life has refrained, denied from calling themselves or being called the teacher, the guru, the source. The way, or the limited way I have understood, the unlimited way in which I have been shared by my teachers, but the limited way I have understood about enlightenment and ego, that they do not coexist. Whosoever, in my humble experience and understanding that I have met, which I would consider a Siddha Purusha, enlightened person, I have seen them so humble. So humble. It reminds me of that, and I may completely say it in a way which is not correct, but the ripest fruit is closest to the ground, something like that. That when the mind is that ripe, which means when we're talking about enlightenment, we're talking about, I'm going to come to an everyday example. When you put the cake of your mind to bake in yoga, it's only completely baked when there is no attachments. Which we can go in the Vedic understanding, which means it's a nirguna state of mind. It is not saguna. It is not sattva, rajas, tamas. It's not, let's go, it is not, you, in order to arrive to that state which we call soham, we have to first go through koham and naham. Who am I? And I am not this. You have to go through that yoga of subtraction in order to come to the point what you were mentioning, that it is not that It is emptiness. It's letting go. It is 1 + 1 is equal to none. Not 1 + 1 is equal to 0, or 1 + 1 is equal to 11, or 1 + 1 is equal to... No. 1 + 1 is equal to none. That is the state of yoga. And once someone touches that state, and as I mentioned, the fleeting experiences are like a touchstone. It slowly transforms. You might observe that on an everyday basis, the mind is automatically picking up things to sit with, to marinate in. But let's say if someone has attained what you mentioned, enlightenment, then what about the ego? Ego is related to antahakaran, manas, buddhi, chitta, ahamkar. Whether we go through Sankhya Darshan, that mind comes later. First is the consciousness, Purusha. Then it is the gunas in complete balance, Prakriti. Then the balance disturbs from Sat, Raj, Tam to Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. The Prakra iti, Prakasha, which is pra, which is sat. That kra, which is kriya, that is raj, and iti, that is a sthiti, that is tam. That is the perfect, prakriti is in the perfect state of equilibrium. There is no mind there. But there is no manifestation either. When it goes through that disequilibrium of gunas, only then there is mahad or buddhi. Only then there is ahamkara. So if we are still talking about ahamkara, first of all, we are still talking about saguna state of mind, and enlightenment is a nirguna state of mind. Enlightenment is not even just the state of prakriti. It is prakriti not towards bhoga, but towards yoga. That is Purusha. I know that some of the things that I have shared might require some further digging, but you know what? As a student, we should be open to taking the challenges.
Absolutely. Curiosity, right? And finding ways to feed that curiosity and that need to understand it. And I'm glad you added a lot of context in there. It's one of those moments where you'll have to pause and go back and listen to it a few times and let it sit with you. But just that thing of, if you're still talking about ego, you're still in that saguna state and you still got work to do. I'm calling that out because sometimes I have seen ego intertwined with the word enlightenment, and it's being used as ways to be more enlightened. Come learn from me. Usually an enlightened being is very quiet about it. And that quality of humility that we were referencing. So what would be some of the qualities of a student or a seeker who is walking this path? Or if I were to ask that a little differently, what qualities should I develop? Even if I'm not aiming to be enlightened, I would like to live in a way where I'm in harmony with everything around me and that ripple effect, right? So what qualities would I, as a seeker, be looking to enhance within me?
That's a really good question. It can be answered in so many different ways, referring to the texts, where the Vedic texts, Yoga Sutras, each of them talk about what are the qualities of a sadhaka, what are the qualities of a sincere practitioner. However, that is something that the listeners can explore. I'll share with you, in my limited awareness, what I have found useful, and hopefully the listeners might find useful too. One of the things that I feel that helps is that idea of discerning whom should I study with? What should I study? Because it's not about the subject. It's not about asanas or pranayam or dhyana. It's about the sincerity with which someone has explored this subject or state. And as a student, there is so much to be confused about. Really, there is so much to be confused about. Whether it is written material, audio material, video material, number of teachers, number of courses, it's endless. It's endless, but this is the reality of this time. I cannot say that, well, let's go back to the time when a student had to renounce and then go into the forests and look for. I mean, I think we have to still look into the forest that is the internet, you know. We still have to search the caves of our
heart. The digital forest.
You know, yes, we still have to stay with one or none, 1 or 0, which is the language of the computers. We have to still stay with that. However, I feel that at every stage, before you just sign up or you buy a book or you enroll, sit with it. Why are you joining this particular course? Why are you buying this particular book? Why are you reading this particular author? Because it matters. Knowledge is a subtle food. And this subtle food becomes a part of your mind and therefore could also become a part of identity. And it will become difficult to unlearn. So this may not be coming from texts, but it is something that is a little bit of my experience based on when I see that practitioners are not paying attention to due diligence that they must do. It is our responsibility. This is one thing that I would say is really important as a quality in a practitioner who is seeking to really understand yoga or seeking, let's say, enlightenment or samadhi or any state which is a steady, balanced state in yoga. Whom do you study with? Once you have chosen someone to study with or something to study about, the second thing is, even if you don't understand it yet, trust it. That does not mean blind faith, because you have already done your due diligence. If you just start with signing up and then someone says just follow, then it is blind faith. But first comes discernment. Whom you are studying with, what are you studying? Are you ready for this? And then then comes what is called in texts, Shraddha. It is important. I remember, Arundhati, at present, I just returned back from seeing my teacher, my yoga guru, who never agrees to being called as yoga guru, considers herself that I am a kindergarten teacher of yoga. So, so I just came back studying from her or being with her. And I'm studying with her since 1999. So it's been now 24, 25 years. I remember in the first year of when I studied with her or started studying with her, she used to say some things which I think I did not even catch the tail of it. Intellectually, the words going into the ear, it had meaning. They were forming some meaning, whatever it was. But was it really forming a meaning? I don't think so. I don't think I was even catching the tail of it. But that trust that this is not meaningless. I may not have there is a saying that even if a wise person shares everything, opens up all the treasures of wisdom, still the receiver will only be able to take what they can take based on their capacity. So after Shraddha comes your dedication to chew upon it. Like the cow has two stomachs, graze, 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 but then sit and regurgitate and chew upon it. This is missing too. What you shared, as you mentioned to the participants of the training program, sit with it. This is the third thing that is missing. So the first one, discernment. The second one, trust. And the third one is sit with it, reflect upon it. There is some kind of understanding that will come with practice, physical practice, going onto the mat and practicing. There is a certain kind of knowing that will dawn upon you when you will sit with yourself, not doing anything with your limbs, just meditating upon it, thinking upon it, contemplating upon it. So I would say these three things are really important for a practitioner.
No, that is beautifully summed up for someone who is leaning towards indulging themselves more in it. I always talk about enlightenment from 1,000-mile distance. And I make it very clear to practitioners that it is, like you said earlier, who am I to talk about this? As always, you bring so much clarity and you pack so much into every response. You sit with every question so thoughtfully and bring forward so much. I have called you a walking, talking encyclopedia so many times about yoga on this podcast. I am always honored that you are here. Should we leave this conversation here? Do you have any additional thoughts? Because this is a never-ending topic in so many ways. Is there anything you would like to add? And if not, do you have anything that you are offering in the new year that you would like to talk about?
There is one thought that's coming to my mind. The promise of yoga is just one, and that is yoga. It is that state of yoga. That state of yoga, which Vyasa in his commentary of Yoga Sutra says is Samadhi. Yoga Samadhi is a consequence of your consistent efforts combined with letting go, abhyasa vairagya. Without doubt, you will reach there. So let's not practice yoga for the sake of siddhis or accomplishment or that goal, Kundalini awakening. And also, don't buy Samadhi. Don't buy Kundalini awakening. These are things that cannot be sold. That is just one thing that I would like to say, and then emphasize that none of the efforts that you have done with sincerity, even if no one on the social media was watching, goes waste. None, even a moment of that sincerity that you have offered in your thought process, honesty in your practice, it matters. It will add up without doubt. Have patience. It is not a fast food experience. So have patience, and there is no rush. There is no next day shipping. There is no 2-hour shipping of yoga. It will take time. Yes, there is generally always a New Year class. I have not shared about it yet, Arundhati, but it will be there on the website. Generally at the end of the year, beginning of the new year, a topic comes to my mind and then I share about it, which means that it has not come to my mind yet. So it will be there on the website. Please keep an eye on the upcoming programs. And yes, one of the subjects that is closer to my heart is Yoga Nidra. And that is coming up in February of 2025. Those who are interested, please look into it. There is always scholarships, there is always a 50% discount to Indian residents. So there are some things. Explore. My intention is to share the limited I know. I hope that it will benefit you. It will empower you. It will make you more curious in exploring it then by yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Indu. What you say is your limited exploration is limitless to those of us who learn from you. As always, thank you so much for being here. I wish you the best and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you would like to get monthly resources sent directly to your inbox, then make sure you are on my monthly mailing list. You can find the link to sign up for this in the podcast description below. And as always, if you found value in this conversation, please remember to support this podcast with a rating, a review, or a comment. Sharing it with a yoga friend will always help this podcast grow. I will see you next week with another guest, another conversation. Until then, keep listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. Take care. Bye-bye.